Today's spoiler video is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Use the link below to pre-order your cards today. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Ravnica Allegiance spoilers. And we're getting near the end of spoiler season. In fact, the full set comes out tomorrow, but we still have some sweet cards to talk about. We got our last two mythics from the set, some rare, some lower rarity stuff, which means we should probably jump right into it and start talking about some sweet new Ravnica Allegiance cards. Before we do, a quick reminder, if you haven't already, it would be so cool of you if you could take a second, click that subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's talk some Ravnica Allegiance, starting with our last two mythics. Number one, oh my god, this card is so sweet. I don't know if it's good, but it is sweet. Captive Audience, 7 mana, enchantment, mythic rare. It enters the battlefield under the control of an opponent of your choice. So, I mean, in a two-player game, it's just going to your opponent. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, which means our opponent's upkeep, since they control it, they have to choose an option that hasn't yet been chosen. And all these options are pretty brutal for our opponent. Number one, their life total becomes 4. Number 2, they discard their hand. Number 3, each opponent, which in a two-player game means us, gets 5 2/2 black zombie tokens. 5! So every single option on this can be absolutely devastating for the opponent, and over the course of 3 turns, they're going to have to choose them all, unless they can get rid of Captive Audience. They're going to have to give us 10 power of zombies. They're going to have to go down to 4 life. They're going to have to discard their hand. So while there isn't too many tricks to building around Captive Audience, this seems like a card that pretty much just wins the game. Yes, it's 7 mana. Yes, it's going to take maybe 3 or 4 turns after it resolves to win the game, depending on how the choices work. But this is an absurd amount of value for its mana cost, and it's kind of like a reverse Demonic Pact. Remember Demonic Pact? It's cheaper, but it's the same kind of paradigm. You get 3 options you can choose, and then you lose the game option. And Captive Audience is kind of similar. Opponent gets 3 bad choices, and they're probably going to add up to them losing the game. So I think this card is just super unique, super spicy. In Standard, I think the best part of this card is we have a ton of ramp. So even though it's 7 mana, if you want to play like a Jund ramp control deck, you can get up to this pretty quickly with Grow from the Ashes, Gifts of Paradise, Gilded Lotus. It's pretty easy to cast Captive Audience, maybe by like turn 5, and start those choices going. The other neat thing about this compared to Demonic Pact is the first choice is going to happen pretty much right away. We cast this during our turn, we pass the turn because we probably used all of our mana to cast it. Our opponent's going to have to make that first choice on their upkeep before they do anything else. So we're almost guaranteed, unless our opponent has like instant speed disruption of some sort, a counter spell, a way to kill it, that we're going to get at least one choice out of it, and even that is a lot of value. So I think Captive Audience is one of the sweetest, most unique designs from Ravnica Allegiance. Whether or not it actually shows up in competitive decks, I have no idea, but this is one of the sweetest cards to resolve, and it's super fun in Commander as well, where you get to kind of make an enemy, a Tomer looking at you, but you get to choose someone to really just kind of screw over in a game of Commander, where they're going down to 4 life, which is brutal in Commander. Discarding their hand, also brutal, giving everyone, except for themselves, a bunch of zombies. So I expect this card to be really fun to build around in Standard, potentially game-winning even in the right deck, and just a super spicy, brutal card to put on someone in a Commander game. Our second mythic for the day is Biogenic Ooze, and this card's pretty interesting as well. 5 mana, 2/2. It doesn't sound too good right off the bat, but when it enters the battlefield, you get a 2/2 Ooze token. Then at the beginning of your end step, you put a +1/+1 counter on each Ooze you control, and then you can pay 4 mana to make a 2/2 Ooze creature token. So this kind of reminds me a little bit, on the bad way, of Crested Herdcaller, which hasn't really caught on in the Standard format. A little bit as well of Soul of Zendikar, with the ability to make these tokens. So the thing about Biogenic Ooze is, even though it comes down as a 2/2 with a 2/2 token, on your first end step you get a counter on everything. So it's going to become a 3/3 right away, which essentially makes it a Crested Herdcaller. But then you have way more long game upside, because you're getting that +1/+1 counter at the end step every single turn, and you have this insane mana sink where you can pay 4 to make a 2/2 Ooze, which is actually going to grow into a 3/3, then a 4/4. So this is a card that, if left unchecked, can just win the game all by itself. Its immediate rate is kind of okay. It's like strong, uncommon, for its immediate power and toughness hitting the battlefield, but if it sits out on the battlefield for 2 or 3 or 4 turns, it's going to win you the game all by itself, which makes it pretty powerful. Also worth mentioning, in Standard, the Ooze Lord aspect, which is one of the most exciting aspects. People have wanted an Ooze Lord for a long time. The Ooze Lord aspect is not that exciting in Standard. We actually only have 2 oozes in the format. One is Prime Speaker Vannifar, which is actually really good with Biogenic Ooze. This is kind of a cool trick. It's right on curve. You can cast your Biogenic Ooze, and then you get that token, which is going to stick around, but you can sacrifice the Biogenic Ooze to go up and get a 6-drop with Prime Speaker, so that's nice. The other one is Corrosive Ooze, which, I mean, it's a 2/2 for 2. It's like Grizzly Bear Ooze. The ability not really relevant, so I don't think you're really going to play Ooze Tribal in Standard, but that is relevant for Commander. We have like the Mimeoplasm, you have Experimental Craj, and a decent number of oozes in the format, so I definitely expect this to show up in Ooze Commander decks, even though it's not a legend itself. So it's a card that it hits things out of the park flavor-wise, being the long-awaited Ooze Lord, and it's kind of just this army in the can for Standard that can win games on its own. So we'll see how it actually shakes out. 5 mana in Standard gets you a lot. You're getting Doom Whispers and Lyras, Planeswalkers, really powerful cards. Is Biogenic Ooze going to be able to compete with those? We'll have to wait and see, but maybe the combination of +1/+1 counter synergies and just an absurd mana sink late-game value where it wins the game off the top all by itself might give it a chance to show up in Standard. Next on our list, we have some rares, and oh my goodness, I love this card. This is one of my favorite cards in the set, Lumbering Battlement. So for 5 mana, you get a 4/5 beast with Vigilance. When it enters a battlefield, you can exile any number of non-token creatures you control until it leaves the battlefield, and it gets +2/+2 for each card exiled this way. So if you can exile just 1 or 2 cards, this is a massive Vigilant creature. The real trick, though, is this can do some cool combo-y things. So in theory, if you could get a bunch of Lumbering Battlements, you could go infinite, where one battlement blinks a battlement, which blinks the other battlement, and they all just kind of like blink each other an infinite number of times. Throw in something with an enter the battlefield trigger, like Goblin Chain Whirler, that's going to keep entering the battlefield as these Lumbering Battlements blink each other, and you could just combo off and kill your opponent. And while saying, okay, I need 3 Lumbering Battlements, might seem like a long shot, and admittedly, having 3 of the same card it's also worth mentioning we do have Hostage Taker, which can fill in for a battlement. We do have Mirror Image, which can fill in for a battlement. So there are ways that you can just go crazy combo with Lumbering Battlement. You can also just play it fairly, where you blink it for value, you cast it, you exile some stuff with Enter the Battlefield triggers, then you can Siren's Ruse or Oath of Teferi to get all those things back, reuse Enter the Battlefield triggers. So it seems like a pretty powerful card. The base rate on the card is a 4/5 Vigilance for 5. It's not bad, and it can easily be the biggest thing on the battlefield, and you throw in some combo potential. It seems like a pretty sweet card, and it kind of reminds me of some cards that we've played in the past in Modern, like Eerie Interlude and Ghost Away. A similar type of effect, where you get to blink all your stuff, and you could potentially loop it and just go super crazy, win the game by just blinking a board full of value creatures. So this is one of the cards I am most excited to build around in Standard, and maybe even in Modern as well. Although in Modern, a little bit less efficient at 5 mana compared to the 3 mana instants and sorceries. So I think this is a card I just can't wait to build around. I love blink decks. This seems like a great value creature, way to reuse your Enter the Battlefield triggers, and just a really big threat on its own. In theory, you can just try to exile a bunch of creatures and one-shot your opponent with Thud or something by sacking your Lumbering Battlement. So I love this card. It's super unique. It has potential to be super powerful as well. Next up, we have Incubation Druid, which at first glance looks like kind of an innocent little mana dork. 2 mana, you get a 0/2, taps to add a mana of any type a land you control could produce. So it is a little bit limited as far as fixing. However, if it has a +1/+1 counter on it, you add 3 mana of that type instead. You can adapt 3 for 5 mana, which is obviously, that's like late game. If you play this fairly, you play it on turn 2, adds mana, eventually adapt it, it starts adding a lot of mana. The thing that makes this card scary is it triggers the triple mana as long as it has a counter on it. You don't have to adapt it to do that, which means there's potential for some insane starts. For example, if you play Incubation Druid on turn number 2, turn number 3 you play Hadana's Climb, put a counter on Incubation Druid, so now it's tapping for 3 mana. You can play another Incubation Druid. The next turn, you get the counter on the second Incubation Druid with Hadana's Climb, and you have enough mana that you can just cast Omniscience, 10 mana on turn 4 in Standard. So if you could get tricky and add counters to this in non-traditional, non-adapt ways, you can do some pretty busted stuff. Modern as well, there's even potential. There's cards like Llanowar Reborn, which just put a counter on something when it enters the battlefield. Turn 1 Llanowar Reborn, turn 2 Incubation Druid, graft the counter onto it, and you're set up to start casting like turn 3 Primeval Titan. So I think this card has potential to be very broken. I mean, 2-mana mana dorks are kind of the going rate in Standard for the most part anyway. Like, yeah, we have Llanowar Elves right now, but normally 2 mana is kind of what you're looking at anyway. And this has an absurd amount of upside if you build around it a little bit to just add an insane amount of mana and put the game out of reach really, really quickly. So I think Incubation Druid, it has some of the highest potential out of any card in Ravnica Allegiance to just do absurdly broken, busted things. Next up, we have Hero of Precinct One, which, I mean, Hero's fine. It is basically a young pyromancer, except instead of triggering off instants or sorceries, it triggers whenever you cast a multicolor spell. So it can trigger off creatures or spells. When you cast a multicolor spell, you get a 1/1 human creature token. And this kind of goes along with Tome of the Guild Pact, which is another multicolor payoff card that we recently got revealed for Ravnica Allegiance. So there's kind of this sub-theme in Ravnica Allegiance of multicolor matter. So you can build like a multicolor deck, play pretty much all multicolor things along with Tome of the Guild Pact to draw extra cards, Hero of Precinct One to make a bunch of tokens, and it could be pretty fun. So the most obvious comparison for Hero Precinct 1 is Young Pyromancer, which we talked about, except Hero Precinct 1 opens up some interesting possibilities. One of the most busted things you can do with this card in Modern is Burning Tree Emissary. If you play a Hero Precinct 1, and then you Burning Tree Emissary, you get a human, then you Burning Tree Emissary, you get a human, maybe you Bushwhacker, you can get some insane Bushwhacker starts with Hero Precinct 1. There's also potential of playing like a multicolor human tribal deck. Remember, the tokens it makes are humans, so it works with like Thalia's Lieutenant and the like, and we already have Mantis Rider as a good multicolor human, Burning Tree Emissary, a good multicolor human, Sin Collector, a good, well, sideboard multicolor human. So maybe we can see a really aggressive Hero of Precinct 1 human deck that's looking to really take advantage of the multicolor cards to go super wide with humans really quickly and then buff them all with your Thalia's Lieutenant or pump your Champion of the Parish a ton of times. As far as Tome of the Guild Pact, it's basically a Vanquisher's banner, except instead of caring about creature types, it just cares about multicolored spells. However, multicolor spells is interesting because remember, again, this means it triggers on non-creatures unlike Vanquisher's Banner. So in theory, you have a Tome of the Guild Pact out, you can Manamorphose, and you're drawing 2 cards, plus it's adding mana itself. So while 5 mana is enough to make it kinda safe, I would not be surprised if someone figured out a way to take advantage of Tome of the Guild Pact in Standard, because drawing a card every time you cast a card is a really powerful effect, and that's what Tome of the Guild Pact can be if you build around it. Next up, we have Priest of Forgotten Gods, a nice little 2-drop, a 2-mana 1/2 human cleric, lets you sack 2 other creatures, and any number of target player each loses 2 life and sacks a creature, and you get 2 mana and draw a card. So Priest of Forgotten Gods, it is a sack outlet. It's not the repeatable free sack outlet we were looking for. Probably the easiest way to take advantage of Priest of the Forgotten Gods is just to use Afterlife. Like, Afterlife gives you extra creatures to sack, you're sacking creatures, you're adding mana, you're also drawing cards, and you're making your opponent lose life and sack creatures. That's a lot of value if you just have a lot of random dorks and Afterlife creatures on the battlefield to sacrifice. This also definitely gives us some potential for the Aristocrat style build. The draining our opponent for 2 life kind of makes this not only a weird sacrifice outlet, but also a payoff in a sense. So you throw in Judith, and every time you do that double sacking, you're hitting your opponent for 4. Poison Tip Archer, the same way. Throw in some Afterlife creatures or recursive creatures like Gutter Bodes, and you might have the ability to actually play a straight-up Aristocrat style deck, with Priest of the Forgotten Gods being a key part. So while Priest is not the free sacrifice outlet that I envision, the Nantucket Husk type effect, where you can just sacrifice any number of creatures whenever you want for free, this might be the card that makes the Aristocrat stack of my dreams finally playable in Standard, and I'm super excited to build around it. Also, worth mentioning that having it hit any number of target players means that this has some relevance in Commander as well, where you're making everyone sack a creature, everyone lose life, so it makes this card a little bit better in Commander as well. We also got Repudiate Replicate, which is our Simic rare split card, and one half is a Stifle, the other half is kind of a one-shot quasi-duplicate, so I actually really like this card. We saw that Stifle effects can be pretty powerful in Standard, especially as a way to threaten Planeswalker ultimates. Having Repudiate as a card that could be in the format makes people think twice before just ultimating their Teferi, ultimating their Vraska, because they could get blown out and lose their Planeswalker. And then, as we've seen with Quasi-Duplicate, there's some really good creatures to copy in Standard. Vampire Sovereigns, Chupacabras, Hostage Takers. So while I'm not sure this is a card that'll just slot into a ton of main decks, it's a card that I'm really glad exists. It can do some really cool, really fun things, both disrupting the opponent and copying our own creatures. We also got all of the Planeswalker deck cards. Not going to talk at length about them, but this is the suite of Donovan cards. Not really much to see here as far as constructed, but some fun stuff if you pick up the deck. And then Domri deck comes with kind of the same thing. The Planeswalker, something that tutors for the Planeswalker, an uncommon, a common, Ragefire, obviously horrible, Lightning Strike, only hits creatures at sorcery speed, but this is a Planeswalker deck card, so it's not going to show up in Standard. It's not supposed to show up in Standard. Instead, these cards are supposed to give new players a fun, cheap intro deck that they can pick up with a cool Planeswalker to boot, and I feel like the Ravnica Allegiance edition does a fine job of what the series is trying to do. Wrapping things up today, we have some lower rarity stuff, starting with, oh man, I expect this to be one of the most popular cards from the set, Persistent Petitioners. So 2 mana 1/3, not that exciting, it's a common. The big deal here is it has the old, you can have any number of cards named Persistent Petitioners clause on it. So if you want to, you can put 40 Persistent Petitioners in your deck, along with 20 islands, and you're good to go. It also has some interesting abilities. So you can pay 1 and tap it to mill a card. The bigger deal is you can tap 4 untapped advisors you control and mill any one of your choice for 12 cards. And Petitioners is an advisor. So this is the next in a long line of cards that haven't really ever caught on in Constructed, but are incredibly popular for casual build-around play. Relentless Rats was the first, then Shadowborn Apostle, Rat Colony, the most recent, showing up now in Magic Arena in specific and singleton formats. So Persistent Petitioners, in some ways it's better than any of these cards. Number one, it's in a different color. This is the first time we've had the any number clause on a non-black creature. Secondly, it has an ability that actually lets you win the game right away by tapping Advisor. So the old trick with Thrumming Stone, where you put a whole bunch of Persistent Petitioners in your deck, casting them all out of your deck, that trick works, just like it does with any of the rat effects. The thing is, with Persistent Petitioners, if you get, let's say, 12, 16 on the battlefield, you can theoretically just tap them all, mill your opponent's entire deck right away. So unlike the rat cards or Shadowborn Apostle, where you do all this Thrumming Stone stuff and your end result is a massive board of creatures that your opponent can wrath away, Persistent Petitioners theoretically just wins the game right away. The other cool trick here is Persistent Petitioners can mill anyone. So you can get down 4 Petitioners, mill yourself for 12, and then use cards like Rally the Ancestors, Return to the Ranks to get all your Petitioners back from the graveyard, and then one-shot mill your opponent for a pretty cheap price. So while I don't know if this card's going to break any formats, I expect the combination of a Rat Colony with a mill card to be one of the most popular casual cards from the set. And this is a card that we're going to look back 5 years from now, assuming it's not reprinted randomly, and we're going to be like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe how expensive this card is. Why did I not keep my Persistent Petitioners? Because this is just a casual dream card that a lot of people are going to build decks around. Otherwise, as far as lower rarity stuff, Sundering Shaman is the Rule XXYY uncommon, and it's actually pretty good. A 5/5 for 4, already good stats, can't be blocked by more than one creature, so going to be hard for your opponent to kill by double blocking. And then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can blow up an artifact or enchantment that player controls. So blow up like a Search for Azcanta, the Immortal Sun treasure map. Scrappling Claws is an interesting reprint, giving us a little bit more graveyard hate, which is pretty important after seeing so many graveyard mechanics in Guilds of Ravnica. Scorch Mark is a really inefficient Magma Spray, 2 mana for 2 damage to a creature. The big deal is, if that creature would die, you get to exile it, which makes this a good option for sniping Arclight Phoenix in specific. This is the Arclight Phoenix killer, and it gets rid of it forever because of the exile. Otherwise, we got some other stuff that probably isn't going to see competitive play. Clan Guild Mage, yeah, I mean, all the Guild Mages have been pretty powered down in our Return to Ravnica block. Orzhov Enforcer isn't bad. A 1/2 with Death Touch, the Afterlife's one, might actually show up in the right style of deck. It does take down like Carnage Tyrants, getting a body afterwards, not bad. Someone compared it to Baleful Strikes. I guess I can kind of see this as like our standard Baleful Strikes. A couple of random White Pump spells. Anyway, that has been our daily Ravnica Allegiance spoilers for today. So let me know what you think. How sweet is Captive Audience? Oh my god, I love that card. What about Biogenic Ooze? Are you happy with the long-awaited Ooze Lord? How can we combo off with Lumbering Battlements? What about Incubation Druid? Is that card just going to be busted? 3 extra mana as early as like turn number 3? Hero Precinct One, can our human Pyromancer do anything? What about Tome of the Guild Pack? Priest of the Forgotten Gods. Is that the sack outlet that we needed for Aristocrats? Repudiate, Replicate, all the lower rarity stuff, the Planeswalker Deck stuff. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.